I'm Lindsay. This week we sat down with Ron Dasher, our executive pastor of Ministries, to have a conversation about identity. Take a listen. Okay, so when we say identity, what do we mean? Like, how would you define or unpack that for someone?
Yeah, so I think identity is really, as we talk about at New City, it's the
Yes.
intersection of my story and God's story. And I think for a lot of us, we have a lot of head knowledge about truth. If we've been in and around church for any amount of time, we belong to a spiritual community. But really what we're talking about is, how do I live that out? What does it look like to anchor my identity in Jesus each and every day? So where this comes from is really based off, Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. So if you remember back in Genesis 1, God creates the world, creates Adam and Eve. Everything's perfect. They're in the garden. It's this shalom, this peace. Then Adam and Eve sin against God. And when they sin, they realize, oh my goodness, we're naked. And they have this shame. And then they attempt to cover themselves. And how they do that is with fig leaves, And so then God comes and walks in the garden, and they're hiding from him. And I think that really speaks to what we do today, which is, when we feel shame, we cover ourselves. We attempt to cover ourselves with something. It could be a mask. It could be, working more. It could be whatever. And then when God asks where we are, we're hiding. We're hiding from him in that shame. Yeah. And as Genesis 3, the story unfolds, there's this beautiful verse toward the end of the chapter where God then clothes them with the skin of an animal. And it's this amazing foreshadowing of Jesus in that picture because of the sacrifice that had to be made of that animal in order to clothe them with the skin. And, I think that's what we're talking about is like really the only true way that we can be covered is by God and through Jesus, in that moment. And so that's kind of what we're getting back to in small ways is really saying, hey, God, I'm tying my identity more to you, through Jesus, and this is how I want to live and wake up each day, coming from a more settled place.
Yeah, that's great. That's such a beautiful picture. I would love for you to unpack like New City's phrase, and maybe you just did, but if you could say it or unpack more, like the intersection between your story and God's story. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think, for a lot of us, we think the world kind of started when we entered the picture, like I was born in 86 and that's when the world began. And I have a friend who introduced herself a few weeks ago, and she used this phrase like, when I was born, I entered into the story is how she phrased that. Her birthday and birth year. And
that's cool.
And I think it's just a way of viewing like, hey, God's been writing a story from the beginning of time, right? And yes, I'm a piece of that and a part of that now. And I matter, of course. But, like I need to intersect God's story and what he's doing in the world. And so we talk about that in the context of purpose. But I think, with identity, I mean, there's a piece of that too. Like I have to remember just to show up each day fully settled, fully present, and really aware of what God's doing in my own heart and life, and then how I engage his story.
Yeah, that's really good. So would love to talk about maybe a little bit of your identity, Ron. So growing up, what shaped your sense of identity, and how has that changed as you've grown in your faith?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a Christian home and, in a Southern church. And so for me, I mean, church was about doing the right thing. And so in that context, and, I think as my understanding of what it meant to be a Christian, it was, you do this, you don't do this. And so I just kind of ascribed to that, like, moralistic view of faith, more or less. And then the other thing that really influenced me, or what I thought was maturity, was more knowledge. And so, as I did more Bible studies, as I eventually went on to college and then seminary, I was like, man, this is what Christian maturity is. It's gaining knowledge. It's knowing more about the scriptures, about theology, about all of these aspects of faith. And what I realize is that, and this, those of us in ministry, I mean, we can know kind of as much as anyone or more, but really it's how we live it out.
Yeah.
And, you know, knowledge is not a substitute for a lack of identity that's anchored in Jesus. So through time, really over the past 5 years, you know, as I've stepped into some of this work, I mean, it's really begun to shape me. You have to have that foundation of truth, but how you build on that each day, you know, you have to be anchored and say like, hey, I can know all the things, but what does it look like to live it out?
Yeah.
And you really need other people in your life to do that. You can't do that entirely
On your own.
alone.
Yeah. How did your like amassing all of this knowledge affect your view or your sense of self?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of, you know,
Yeah.
just thinking I had arrived. Like I was like,
Yes.
yeah, okay. Like there's always
Yeah.
more to know, of course. You could go on and get a PhD or whatever in some of these areas, but really, you know, the eye-opening piece for me was saying like, okay, it's not about what I know. And we see this happen all the time, you know,
Yeah.
like some great heroes of the faith, people that are, you know, some of the smartest, most well-spoken folks fall from those platforms for various reasons. And I would say it's really around this area of identity is because, you know, you can think like, hey, I know all the things there is to know, but how are you living that out, not only in the public sphere, but, you know, behind closed doors when no one else is watching? And am I really striving for something else in the midst of this? Am I striving for notoriety or, you know, to be the most competent person or perform or whatever it may be that, you know, that core lie that I'm believing? Or am I really trusting, you know, okay, like God's got me today. I'm going to show up today and trust that I don't have to prove myself in any way to him or anyone else. And we're always growing, you know, and being sanctified, and I'm made in the image of God. Like what a beautiful picture to just rest in that. That is my first identity, the Imago Dei that he gave me in the garden. And yes, the world's broken and I try and cover myself in various ways, but you know, I don't have to do that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I definitely can relate to that. This might be a hot take, but I liked school. I liked learning and went to seminary as well, but really enjoyed learning. But I remember a point where I just like, the more I learned, I think it overwhelmed me of like, oh, I need to keep learning, you know, and it was like, I need to collect knowledge. And so I like what you're saying of like, well, how does that knowledge affect your identity? Like, how are you actually like living that out? So that was definitely a big one for me in my sense of self. And then performance. I'm definitely a performance gal. And so I played sports all growing up and in college. And when I was good at it, like I was cool, you know? And so I definitely like got accolades, and just my achievements made me feel good about myself because other people were noticing or complimenting. And so that really contributed to just a broken sense of identity. And to me, it was like, if I do something well or good, people like me, you know, or people want to be my friend or, you know, this or this. And so that definitely became like, I could control my identity, and it was like what I do. And so that was in college, but then coming out of college, you know, and entering the real world, I was like, oh, and I guess no one really cares about that, you know?
Well, how did that influence your perception of God? Like, were there ties to that and how you viewed him?
That's a good question. What I thought God thinks about me?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. Let me think hindsight.
Because I'll say for me, I mean, I think, you know, being able to relate really well to some of the performance drive, like that's how I viewed God the Father at times, you know, was like, okay, if I'm living right, God's smiling. He's pleased with me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing the right things. I'm going to church every week. I'm having my quiet time. I'm living, you know, a moralistic life. And that translated to the way that, you know, I thought God was looking down going, all right, like, keep it up, Ron. But if I didn't do that, I would just imagine like his face changing from like a smiling face, like I'm happy with you, to like this frowning face of, oh, like you screwed this up, you dropped the ball, you didn't do this or that, you know. And I think that's can just be like such a dangerous place because the reality is like, yes, there is sin and brokenness and God doesn't want us to live that way. But, when we truly believe in our hearts, like, man, I'm a beloved son, I'm a beloved daughter of the King, no matter what, like that just changes the way that you view the Father and view yourself. And I think it's such a different way to live than culturally we get swept up in sometimes.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I definitely walk around. I want to do the right thing. Like everything I do, I have a real sense of right and wrong, which can be perfectionism, or just a graceless, I think, way to live towards myself and towards others. But I had a pastor say to me once years ago, and I think he might have gotten this from someone else, but he said, there's nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. Like you are loved. And I think to me, I was like, oh, I can't lose anything. Like, I think I lived my life thinking that something was at stake, like my identity was at stake or had to prove it or earn it or strive. And that's definitely something I'm still kind of coming back to of like, I don't have to, like, I'm secure. And you use the word anchored a lot, which I love. Just what am I anchored in? And it's something bigger than myself. And there's nothing I can do to lose it. Nothing's at stake. And so, that's a good question.
We talk about, or the phrase like, are you living for an identity or are you living from an identity?
Yes.
And I think, when you really step back, like those are two very different things. Am I striving for something?
Yeah.
In my faith, in my work, wherever, my family, or am I living from this place of like, hey, I know who I am. I don't have to strive. I can actually trust that, and it plays out in various ways. Like God's in control. I can, I don't have to be as anxious or fearful or whatever it may be if I truly believe that. But man, that's a hard shift to make. And it takes years and a lot of people in your corner that are encouraging you along the way.
Yeah, that's good. I am curious by the word anchored. I know that's like a word that you use and a word you've used here, but why is that word important to you? Or why do you use that to kind of describe God's love for you?
Yeah, I mean, I just love the image of that. If if you've been on a boat out in the ocean or in a pond or whatever, I mean, just the image of at times like it can get rocky, and but where am I tied to? And like the storms of life will happen, but if my anchor is in the right place and it's secure, then I'm going to be okay. And even though the waves and wind are coming, I know that my identity is secure, and the only place it's secure is in Jesus. And if I try and secure it in other places, it's not going to hold. And so, I think for me, someone who loves being on the water, like I've anchored in secure places, and before I know it, I'm like drifting away from where I want to be. And like, that's such a, just a powerful image of what it can look like in life is that, if my identity is my work, my family, or my performance, or all these other things, like I can look up and, a few months, weeks, years later, I'm not in the place I want to be because my anchor hasn't held.
Yeah, that's good. What do you think is the biggest lie that culture tells us about our identity?
Well, I think there's a lot. Yeah. I would say, I think just kind of in the day and age of social media, I think it's easy to believe this lie that everyone else has it together and I don't, and just kind of have this imposter syndrome of every room I walk into, like, because, everyone's putting out their best foot, they're showing like their shiny, happy family and everything on social media and, in various places. But I'm the only one that has hard things in my life. I'm the only one that, is insecure. I'm the only one that whatever it may be, the core lies that you're, kind of believing and telling yourself. And culturally, like it can feel so lonely to be in that place. It can feel like, man, like everyone else has got it together. And of course, as when you start peeling back the layers of that and you get to know those people and you hear their story, like no one has it together. And the reality is like culture wants you to think like everything's perfect and we've got it figured out. But outside of Jesus don't. And so like, that's, I think, the biggest lie that we're prone to believe just based off the way that our society operates now with, primarily in the social media space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think comparison really is a lot of what you're saying. And that's a
Yeah.
huge thing with social media, because without social media, you're just living your life with your community and you don't, see what's out there. And I think it, can cheapen the blessings that you have in your life. And that's been a big thing for me. So I definitely relating to what you're saying. Can you talk a little bit about masks? And I know you use that a lot, especially with Iron Collective, but can you unpack a little bit about what a mask is?
Yeah, I think, it relates back to that Genesis passage where you try and cover yourself, like
Yeah.
Adam and Eve did with the fig leaves. And, it's somewhat of a nuanced thing, like what are the masks that I'm wearing? And I think in a big ways it's tied to our story, our family of origin. And so, a lot of that actually informs the mask that we wear. But what's happening is, with the mask, like you're projecting something to the world. Like, this is how I want to appear. I want to appear competent. I want to appear professional. I want to appear like I have it all together, whatever it may be. But the inside of the mask, that's kind of the outside. The inside of the mask is, what am I hiding? Like, what are the areas of shame or embarrassment is another word, what, that I'm trying to actually shield and cover with this mask. And so we do an exercise,
Yeah.
in these groups where you actually write that out and you say, like, here's the mask I'm most often wearing and here's what I'm hiding. And, it's an interesting concept because some of them aren't bad. In fact, like, working a lot or workaholism or whatever, like achievement, I mean, those things are actually celebrated by culture. But if you're, if you can tie that to an area that I'm hiding this thing, I'm actually trying to not be found out, or I'm trying to, make people like me or whatever, that's where it's most telling is when, you go like, oh, this is actually what I'm covering when I put that mask on.
Yeah.
So, it's, like I said, somewhat of a nuanced thing, but I think it's a really powerful tool when you begin to unpack some of your story and then tie that to a mask. And we actually need people in our lives to help us see that, because we can't often see it ourselves. We need those other people to say, hey, are you showing up this way, or why are you showing up this way? And just ask us those questions that, folks that we trust and know, and that we've invited into our story, and allowed the opportunity to speak into that. We need those folks to help us uncover our mask. And then, when you take that down, I mean, you are removing a shield in a sense. And so
vulnerable.
Yeah. I mean, you can get hurt.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we most often leave them up, you know, and especially in different circles. But if you can find that group, that community where you can say, hey, I'm okay taking this mask off with you. And it's such, because the reality is, like, when you have your mask on and someone says, I love you, they're actually saying, I love you to your mask and not you. But when you have your mask off and someone says, I love you, and you're, you're accepted and God loves you, then you're truly receiving the love. So it's just that difference of, like, is my mask receiving the love, like what I want people to see, what I'm projecting, or am I? And man, it's so powerful when you actually receive it.
Do you mind sharing maybe a mask you wear?
Yeah, well,
In this vulnerable, safe space. And
no, I would
or
say,
just an example maybe of what someone would be hiding underneath that.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, a lot of it, I kind of mentioned this core lie concept. A lot of it's kind of tied to that. Like, what are the lies that I deeply believe? And there's, like, general truth that can cover a lot of things, but that pointed truth for your core lie, typically from scripture, like, who does God say you are, is super powerful. So just an example for me is, my core lie is, like, I'm only loved for what I do. I'm loved based off performance. So of course, I'm an achiever. I'm going to perform. I'm going to try and do things the right way 100% of the time. And when I don't do that, which of course no one is ever going to do that, but when I don't, I mean, that's when I start to believe this core lie of, like, well, I'm not welcome here, or this group doesn't need me because I'm not performing. And the reality is, of course, people that know and love me are like, no, like, we just want you here for you. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You don't have to be the perfect employee or perfect parent or perfect spouse. But that's something that I can quickly get into believing because it's so deeply rooted in me.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that's like, when I remove that, and when someone says, hey, even in spite of this failure, like, you're
You
still
belong.
loved, you
Yeah.
belong here.
Yeah.
It just speaks volumes,
Yeah. There's so much, I felt like, tied in your mask of like belonging that if you don't perform, then you're not welcome or you don't belong.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I resonate a lot with that. I think one of my masks is that I want people to see that I'm competent. I know what I'm doing. I just know the answers, which is so crazy to say out loud because that's unrealistic. And I think underneath, it's hiding a sense of, I don't have it all together and I want to be seen that way. And so I don't know what that would be hiding underneath. What's it hiding underneath?
You tell me. Let's unpack that.
Yeah. But I love what you're saying about community. And I'd love to unpack that a little bit too. Just the role that people play in our identity, a safe space. And I love the picture you're painting of when you take off the mask and really expose yourself to people who are safe and they say that, hey, we love you. Like that feeling, which I have people in my life and groups in my life that are that space. There is like no other feeling, or just you feel anchored, you feel secure and safe. So I'd love to talk about community and how like the role community plays in identity.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's something that we can't entirely do alone. I think you can do a lot of this work, through scripture. You can read pointed truths that cover that lie. I think in one-on-one settings through counseling, is another huge way to just unpack pieces of your story. But I just love the idea of like these small groups because what you need is actually people in your life that reflect the image of God, like your first story, back to like this idea of our first story in the garden. We are creating God's image. We need people that reflect that back to us, mirrors in our life that can say like, hey, I know in this moment you're believing this lie, but let me tell you the truth. You're believing this lie that you have to perform, you have to do this, but here's what God says, your love for who you are. And so, I think that's at a very basic level, the hope of these groups or of any small community that you've built is that you can do that together. You can do that for one another. And that feels like, I think about like a cut or a burn, like just this soothing balm over it. It's like, man, like when I let down my guard, when I open up, it's super hard and super scary. We all want to be seen, but none of us want to be found out, and so like you open yourself up, and then when someone does, like in a very kind way, they're not trying to fix you. They're not trying to change, you should do this. You're like, why didn't you? They're not making it about their story. Why have this time you share this?
The
like,
worst.
really,
Don't be
but
that
they're
person.
just, helping you peel back the layers through questions and listening well. And then in certain moments can speak like these beautiful truths from scripture of who God says you are to you. Just feels like so great and so refreshing. And there are just very few places in our world where we can do that.
Yeah. It reminds me, I don't know if this is directly related, but I just read a book on trust. And there were a lot of great things from that book. But one of the biggest things I took away, like very practically, he said this is going to be so elementary, but to me it was like a light bulb moment. But he said to trust people, you have to take a risk. There really is no other way. And you have to be vulnerable in a safe space, or in a space that feels appropriate to be. But he's like, you have to take that step. You have to take a risk. And so that's hard for me. And I think being vulnerable, going back to, I want to be seen as put together and competent. I'm fine, And so I think being vulnerable about how I'm feeling is hard in certain contexts. But when this author was like, in order to build trust you have to take that step, and it's sometimes feels like a risk, or just it takes courage. And when I choose that, and when I show myself, or am vulnerable, like it's the reward, like the fruit of it is really great. I've seen, especially recently, I'm like, oh, that was worth it. Like that was worth the risk.
Yep.
So it's not going to be easy, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so I think it takes taking that step. To be vulnerable.
Well, vulnerability is a Brene Brown quote.
Yes, our queen.
Vulnerability is what we most long for in others and what we most are afraid of in showing in ourselves. And, like what you just said, when you open up in a group or with safe people, people are like, oh my gosh, like so great to hear the real Lindsay or get to know, what's really going on. And like, it's super scary to do that. Right.
Yeah.
And so it does take risk.
Yeah.
And there's not, there aren't safe spaces that you can do that. And where you can get hurt in some of those spaces that aren't, safe. But when you find those and you find those people that you can trust and that can hold your story and treat it like, the precious vase that it is and not be flippant with it, but truly carry that with you. Man, it's very,
great.
Yeah.
I think for me though, I'm like, how do I know this space isn't safe? I haven't allowed myself to be vulnerable here, And so I assume it's not safe, And so I don't know if that applies in every context, but for me, I can just be like, oh, this isn't safe. But then when I'm vulnerable, I'm like, oh, that person actually did receive what I'm saying, And so,
Yeah,
How do you know?
Well, I think you keep taking steps in there.
It's good.
I mean, there's, layers applies to men, but I think could apply, to women as well. But you kind of start off as strangers and then move to acquaintances.
Yes.
And then you have like buddies, and then you have brothers. And kind of moving through that progress, you're helping, you're unpacking like a different part of your life in each of those, And so I think the last two, buddies and brothers, the difference is like with a buddy, you're giving them access to your life. With a brother, though, you're giving them access to your story.
Oh, well, that's good.
And so when you move from like, hey, they just kind of know me, they know what's going on in my world, to actually they know me, like they know my family of origin, they know parts of my story, the good and the bad along the way, like that's when, you've really found someone that you can trust, and that's that safe person.
What's the female equivalent of that?
You tell me.
Buddy, gals,
sister,
queens, sisters. Okay, as we wrap up today, you've mentioned these groups that we have in New City, but I wanted to ask, why has New City made identity an essential on the discipleship journey? Like, how important is identity?
Yeah, well, very important.
It's everything.
No, kind of what we've talked about all along is like, it's easy in the Western church to just acquire more knowledge, like to sit and soak, just soak it in and just kind of continue to consume knowledge and think, that when I get enough knowledge, then I'll be ready for X, Y, Z. I'll be ready to lead. I'll be ready to do this. But it's a fallacy to like fall into that trap, because you'll never acquire enough knowledge to where you feel fully competent. And so identity, I think, is really moving from this place of like, I have to know more, to like, how do I live this out? And, and that's why it's one of those 4 essentials. By itself, it can get sideways, right? If we're only like, oh, I've just got to like know more about myself and I've got to be more in tune and all those things. But in the context of the other 4 essentials, it's super important and a huge part of our discipleship journey. So,
that's good.
We've built it out and are continuing to do so, but I think is a pretty new frontier in the church, Big C Church, just to be leaning in here with mental health and counseling and just normalizing all those things. And these groups as well that are, more tied to emotion and the heart than they are the head knowledge. Yeah,
that's great. Can you unpack a little bit about mental health and what New City is doing there?
Yeah, so Church in the City Counseling is our partner organization. They're our primary partner organization. And is just becoming like this huge piece of our church, because so many people have raised their hand. And like I said, as counseling and therapy has become culturally more acceptable, more people are just saying like, hey, I think, I might need that. I want to step into that. And so we have groups that kind of come alongside some of that with story groups and Iron Collective. And really, part of the win is people out of those groups stepping in to counseling, or people stepping from counseling into those groups. But just the idea is they're creating those safe spaces, for people to unpack their story and their mask and all these concepts we've talked
great.
about, true and false self.
That's great.
But counseling is such a great way to go deeper with your own story. Have someone that, is listening well, that's active listening, being curious. I mean, all those things, not trying to fix you, but just helping you almost assess yourself and go like, hey, I want to be more aware of my story. I want to know more about it. And the way we do that is through great questions.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here, Ron.
Yeah, thank you.
I have one final fun question.
Oh, boy.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading? Well, I just finished Daring Greatly from Brené Brown, which is a great book.
Yeah.
So I'm about to read this trust book that you gave me.
Tell me your takeaways. Yeah, we'll come back on and do a book report.
It's my next book.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.